DataVault, and that will be, I suppose, part of it. And then there's a special for all of the members of the meeting today. They can actually ask questions in Afrikaans, and I'm hoping that Marco will be able to answer them. If not, then I'm sure Remco, he they can ook die taal gooi. So if you'd like to ask in Afrikaans, that would be quite interesting. We even have people from Finland here that would probably be able to ask in Afrikaans. Marco, all yours, sir. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Howard. Always a pleasure to be here. Yeah, so it was. I understood it was kind of a DataVault month for you guys. So I inserted a few slides that touch on the DataVault topic.
Thank you.
And for the people that have seen my presentations before, some slides might come across again, but I'll just click through it. And remember, I numbered all the slides, so if you have any questions or want to post any questions in the chat, you can simply refer to the slide numbers at the bottom left, I guess, and that way I can quickly see what context that question is. So the working title for this presentation is Data Works When Precision Matters. And for those of you guessing what you're looking at on the opening slide, I will reveal the answers at the end of it. There's a small agenda here. We need to express them faster. I'm going to talk a little bit about fact-oriented modeling, and then the all aboard to see if we can pull everything and everyone a deck to do the same thing. I'm going to jump into DataVault, and then I'm going to finish up with some data and language, and then allow you guys to prompt your questions. So for the past 20 years, I was always surprised that more and more tech comes around the corner and more tools come to the surface and more problems need to be solved. And after 20 years of witnessing all of that, there is a trend going back to the software developers realize they need to talk the language of the business. Data warehouse, BI, data science, everybody realizes we have so much data now that we're having a hard time figuring out how to make sense of all of that and how to communicate all that to the end users. That is actually usually the producer and user of the data. And that is very difficult. And we can't just simply express our thoughts. We need to communicate a little bit more than that. And we need language for that. And to make a point here, I'm making. This is a small picture of my youngest.
Sorry, Marco.
Yes.
We don't have your screen presented.
It is not shared. Wow, it dropped off the radar.
Yes, I think Debbie presented and then.
Oh, okay. No worries. I'll get back to slide 1 and I'll just click through that. Let's see. I see. Yes, the red Microsoft Teams border is back. Yeah. Okay. See, I missed that one. So this is the opening slide, and if you guys are guessing what this is, I'll reveal that at the end of the presentation. Let's see and get through the slides. The agenda, the communication, that is a dilemma. We have business that doesn't speak tech, and tech has difficulty speaking business, and we need to overcome that. And this is where I ended with the slide. My youngest kid, a couple of years back, he's now almost 18, and a lot of things were blue, and he found some ink. But it was not very clear on what he was trying to express. So whenever we have some sort of architectural picture or schemas of databases, everything, the business is not going to understand that. So we can think that we are expressing our thoughts, but that might just not be enough. We need a little bit more communication. And to dive into that a little, This is a very interesting picture that is over 3,000 or 5,000 years old. And the first time I saw that, I was like, "Oh, that's cute." I mean, but it actually is a language, a written language that uses icons and pictures, and it says the total of 29,805 measures of barley were received over the course of 37 months. And it was even signed by a person or organization called Kushim. So interesting enough, where we might see a picture, the more important is that we communicate facts, because those will last visual communication. And in the early years, we did all of that verbally or manually. And we've gone through some technical revolution that allowed us to do it mechanically. And you may know the vacuum tubing in large office buildings or banks, moving checks down to the basement and pushing money back up to the cash register. Mail rooms work like this, and but it could even go further. We're currently in the era of the electronic information spread, and things are going faster every day. And this is a very interesting phenomenon. So just looking back at 1946, it was produced in 1946, but the machine was also kept in secrecy and developed in the Second World War to calculate the trajectory of ammunition to bomb and shoot cannons at Germans from across the English Channel. And these were massive machines. And I found it interesting. I did some recalculation on it. It must have cost $500,000, and it does about 5,000 calculations a second. So it was really impressive at the time. But hardware evolved a little, and if you compare that to the metrics of, for instance, an iPhone, you can see how the weight has diminished. The amount of switches in a little device like that has grown exponentially. To not even mention the amount of calculations per second, and that has a counterline that says, well, wait a minute, if you calculate now how much a single calculation is priced, you can see that calculation, CPU, all of that seems incredibly cheap. That of course comes with certain advantages, and I looked up. I found a website that lists all the advantages of technology, that it eliminates repetition, it creates a more equal society, the knowledge is more available, and we're having more fun in different ways, and the list goes on. The web page then continues with, well, there are also some downfalls, and this is to me, it makes it, I put it together in a non-correlated way that I thought was fun, because it eliminates repetition, but automation can make us lazy. It creates a more equal society, but it also can create social disconnects. So every advantage comes with a potential disadvantage. So looking at how hardware is everywhere, and the price is going down, and information is being spread faster and faster, it has an upside, but as we all know, it also has a downside. When it comes to data security issues, when it comes to data quality issues, when it comes to all the negative impacts of a system not properly implemented, human life is affected, and not down the line, usually faster and faster. So keep in mind when we're doing IT or building tools or building data products, that even though it seems to be going faster and faster and easier and cheaper, we should not lose out of sight the potential risks that come with it. And I love this fable in that respect. Faster is not always better. So we need to balance that. And there seems to be some resistance, because slow reminds a lot of young generation is isn't that waterfall to think? Should we not be doing fast and agile? Well,
Yeah.
there is a balance to be found. And if you have no idea which direction you're running, then you might not cross the finish line first at all. So a little planning, a little knowing where you want to run to is very helpful. So let me talk a little bit about this fact-oriented modeling. We have data all over, and I mentioned it before, and we're trying to make head or tails from it. We're trying to find the facts that are actually stored in the data. And the interesting part about the fact-oriented modeling is that it actually starts with the facts and tries to hold them above water all times, even during the production of your data implementation systems. And where business users don't always know IT, and IT sometimes have a hard time understanding the business when it really comes down to the nitty-gritty details, systems end up being implemented that not entirely align with how business users really need the system to operate. And what fact-oriented modeling is trying to achieve in this is that when people in the business side communicate about their data, they do that usually in their own language. And fact-oriented modeling captures that and then tries to generate the required artifacts for IT production. And in that way, there's a better guarantee that you will support the original communication of the business users and come full circle. This slide shows a little timeline. It's not something that I present as brand new. This has been done in the Netherlands since the 70s. Specifically, this FSOAM flavor of fact-oriented modeling is developed in the 90s. And if you're really interested, you can follow up and order the book. And I think it's coming from Technics Publications, so you might even find it online as a PDF. And this really tries not to focus on tables and entities or classes and columns and properties, but doesn't necessarily focus on technology itself either. It's not an XML, JSON API. It's all of those things because it focuses really on the building blocks that we can find in our language. And the stepwise procedure is to come from human communication and try to formalize that in a way that everybody agrees on how things are expressed. And with that, we can state facts, we can model those facts, and then we can generate the artifacts that we need for system design and implementation. So let's dig into that a little further just to give you an overview of what you can do with fact-oriented modeling. Because I'm currently speaking, so you could argue that I am the speaker of this meetup at this point. But now we need to figure out, okay, what is the definition for it? What is the attributes? Does it relate to anything? How to build their table for that, and how to do governance? All these technical questions. Even though every person that sees this recording or is currently live with us understands what I mean by I am the speaker. So. But let's talk about it. And I'm simply stating a fact that Mark and Howard speak at this meetup. And, I prepared this. I wasn't aware that Debbie was going to speak here too. So I missed that opportunity, but I'm sure the business will correct me on that if I'm stating this wrong. But it's actually an aggregation of different facts. So let's break it down, make it a little smaller. As soon as we break it down and create what I call elementary facts, I would say that Marco speaks at the meetup, and a different fact would say that Howard speaks at the meetup. Those are two distinct facts. Now, it's still not entirely clear which meetup, so we need to expand that a little and make it a fully expressed fact. So we're gonna make it grow a little and we're gonna improve on it. And now it says Marco presents in the meetup of Dama, South Africa, 2023, April 24th. And I just kind of made up that Howard's spoke last week, but I might be accurate. I wasn't there. But the thing is, the facts that I now state are enriched in a way that everybody can agree on it. Now, here comes the definition, because these different facts are categorizable as the meetup speaker. They are of a similar fact type. And there is knowledge presented in these facts. So if we get to the information grammar that we express, we can break it down and we have this very rich information grammar. We have a speaker that is identified by a speaker name. In this case, we used Marco. Marco presents in the meetup, and we talk about meetups as the meetup of a specific meetup day. And this meetup day then again breaks down into a group and a day. And the group then is identified by a group name being Dharma South Africa. So even though the process of actually using normal communication in natural language and concrete examples, you would still need to dig a little deeper to really get down to the knowledge of those facts. And if you're interested in a different language, we can express the same fact in different ways or in different languages. And I improvised a little. My Italian is not the greatest. Given the context, I should have done it in Afrikaans or at least Dutch. So, you know,
Yes.
maybe next time. But you can see how the different nouns can be translated very easily, and all the semantics that tie it together can be translated too. So having a grammar tree is one thing, but you know, in the end, we all like to see pictures, and so this whole information grammar can be depicted in a graphical way. I'm not going to dig too much into the details because we still have a few slides to go, but once the expressions are entered, once you have analyzed the information grammar, this is just visual eye candy. It allows you to select whatever information that you have in your information model, and it will present you with a graphical representation of that. Now, structure is one thing, but we need to, the animation is a little bit off. We need to also figure out what are the rules, what are the constraints, what can be done and what cannot be done. So for instance, if I would say Marco presents at the meetup of Dharma South Africa on the 17th of April, and he also presents it 24th of April, that could be a fact. That could be correct. So if I vary the population and the examples, I could then start saying, okay, well, maybe Marco presents 17th of April, but how it also presents the meetup of 17th of April. Now, likely there's not enough time to have us both present, so I'm assuming that the second one is false. So deriving that, I mean, these are the kind of interviews that you can do with your business audience to figure out what is the constraint, what is valid, what is not valid. And then we can derive the constraints, the rules that says, well, wait a minute, that means that every meetup has only one unique speaker. And once we've figured out what is possible and what not, we can start calling in some help. So let's call in the Batman in this case. The Batman, the algorithms, the generators, the plugins can then pick up on the facts model and generate all kinds of artifacts. It can generate a logical diagram. It can generate the database scripts, depending on annotations and constraints, etc. But I can also just as easily create the JSON schema files to if I want to develop messages for a message bus or API. All of that comes from very rich information grammar. And this way, you can see that, hopefully you can see that this method is very detailed and it creates high quality data models. It allows you to communicate even about very complex business domains, and it will hold up even at scale where there is a huge amount of data types, And because every fact in itself is entered with care and with detail, we can also track, who's the business department who said that, who's the authority that we interviewed, who modeled all of this. So there's a huge amount of detail on the governance level. And it allows us to engage with the business and the domain expert in their own language. So creating an environment where we engage with the business side and be able to create all kinds of artifacts for the IT side, we can now start building on a platform that allows everybody to join forces and work together. And one of the things that that accomplishes is that we then start developing a shared common language across the organization. We may find that there are certain domains of language, but they might share themselves jargon and definitions. And then we might find very exquisite domains that, they're the only users that actually use that kind of data, and they have their own specific sublanguage. Now, once you've established that hierarchy, if you will, then the organization will have an easier time standardizing on their own jargon. And once that is established, it will have a positive effect on the alignment of the organization itself as well. But you don't always have the opportunity to start this detailed. Sometimes you have greenfield, sometimes you have to re-engineer existing systems and data domains. And I would like to hint at Remco's presentations, and I have a few slides of those. He's done great work on the ensemble logical modeling. He developed a bunch of artifacts that help almost like a whiteboard session with a blank canvas to start talking with the business in a way that is really, really easy access to the terms. And in this case, we have a list of core business concepts that are either categorized as an event or as a person or as a place. And it's an easy step up to getting to the details. And I'm going to show you one of the other forms that he presents and talks about as well, is the core business concept form itself. And this one is the example of our customer. You can see that in the blue cell on the top left. And then it has related core business concepts. It has the store mentioned, it has the product mentioned, it has the employee mentioned. And this is a very lean way of getting to some of the verbiage that the organization uses. And some of the slides come from the tool Kstock, which supports these forms. You can simply import them in Kstock and open up a whole plethora of concepts that come from these forms. And that allows you very quickly to assemble a model of concepts, including all the definitions that come from these forms. A customer in this case is a natural person who's buying products in our store, etc. We have classified it as the concept for a person. It even comes with color coding, plural names, abbreviations, and all of that. But then it still needs a little bit more detail because we haven't gotten to the level of where we communicate facts. And to be able to do that, we can then start adding those to the information model that will promote all of these concepts, which are in a way loosely connected, to really get to the language and be able to verify those with concrete examples. And that way, we go from a model of concepts to a conceptual model. And in the latter, for the people who are not immediately aware of the difference, the first is just concepts with lines, whereas the conceptual model is really accurate, but it doesn't tell you how to implement it. Yet we can transform such a rich information grammar to artifacts like that I've previously shown. So going from concept to conceptual model to artifacts. Now, that from information model to an artifact is a bunch of algorithms. It's not something that we have to invent every time that we have to do that. We don't have to retype it, redesign it. All of those come from algorithms, which are very precise and tested and developed over years. And one of the things that we can then generate is a structure for DataVault. DataVault is really a mechanical way of making sure that you can store all your data in one place. And I listed a couple of definitions here. DataVault allows historical data representation from multiple sources, and it's designed in a way that is resilient to change. It's very easy to add an entirely different source system or change the source system without breaking down the data warehouse where it all comes together. But there are some, how do you call it, road bumps there. Because even though it comes very close to what they call the hubs or the core business concepts, you still need to be very accurate in its definitions. And what I've seen so far is that a lot of DataVault implementations start off with a raw vault, make a one-on-one copy from the source systems, and then start enriching it again, all the way up to what they call a business vault to be able to make sense out of it from a perspective of the business. And there's a lot of knowledge that needs to be poured back into it. You can imagine that if you've done that from the start, you would have the information model. You can generate these data vaults, etc., etc. So let me show you, because all of this shows only what it does on a technical and organizational level of data. Let's start with a little information model that I've built out of examples. So I'll skip on all of the details. It's something with customers and order lines and all of that. But in here, we can recognize our core business concepts, and I'll color them blue in a way that is very common in DataVault modeling. And those are called the hubs. We have the customer, we have branch location, we have product, order line, and orders as core business concepts, as Remco would call them. Now, those typically have business keys, the way that the business identifies the data that is stored underneath these concepts. And mind you, we started with that. We started with business communication. So in this stage, you already have the natural keys for those. Now, to connect all of those, we need something that DataVault calls links to connect the different hubs. And we color code them green. And you can see that we need to connect the customer to the branch location, and we need to figure out somehow how that line turns into a link. Same from branch location to order. We need to figure out how the order destination works. So every connecting part between hubs needs to be figured out. And then we have a ton of other data. That is what you would consider all the attributes, or in DataVault terms, you would group the attributes of these entities as satellites. And those are colored yellow. And then in the information model, you see different structures at the edges of the diagram that are really just little blobs, and you might argue that that data is redundant or it needs to be stored as a reference data. So I can chop off the day and the percentage, but I might want to keep the warehouse at the far right corner, because that might hold my reference data. Now, I did all of this in a mock-up a while back. We actually started developing the algorithms to do this in an automated way. And now we can go back to an information model and simply color code the diagram itself. And now you can instantly recognize, wait a minute, this is all the blue stuff and those are my hubs. The green connectors are my links, and everything that is yellow is my satellite. And this is one more topic that I would like to discuss, because everybody recently is very worried about Chat GPT, or is delighted by the potential of it. And I see more discussions on LinkedIn about we can automate a lot if the AI could do stuff for us. And the interesting part of that is, from my perspective currently, and I've played with it a lot and I've read a lot, is that at some points it seems to be very impressive, and on many other parts it's highly inaccurate. So it's something that you should only apply if you've really got some experience before you start trusting not just the AI, but trust what you develop as a tool chain to work with these kind of AIs, because you have to pour something into it to get something back. And as this picture shows, we can pour in a lot of data, but are we getting out the right information that we're searching for? So let's pick up a few examples here, and I'll tie it all back together into a conclusion. So one of the things that I did, I used a little model that has a bunch of terms about students and apprenticeship, and I basically asked ChatGPT, can you write me, and this is in retrospect, can you give me the business scenario that contain these terms? And it comes back with a wonderful story. It says John Doe is student from city name, and I'm like, okay, city name, maybe that was meant as city, but I can live with the city name. And then it has assigned an apprenticeship in the city of population, and then it becomes questionable. It's like, what is the grammar here? So sometimes it makes up examples like this. Who's this John Doe? I know. Is that a student? Was that how we identified a student? Apparently, because John's apprenticeship is in the category of his preference and will last for a duration of 12 months. Now, again, these are easy to overlook texts that somewhat describe the business scenario, but if you really know the business scenario yourself, then you can see how this might be helpful getting something started, as to jump off from, to help discuss the business scenario at first, because it's probably not John, and he certainly hasn't been assigned the apprenticeship in the city of population, because that probably doesn't exist. So we actually use the wrong text to help feed the discussion with the domain experts. So instead of relying on this to do our work and to do the thinking instead of ourselves, we actually use this in case talk to actually facilitate asking more questions. How can this be right? And the beauty is, if somebody says this is incorrect, we will have found the business rule, and then we have learned something. As soon as we're in the realm of everybody saying, yeah, that's right, we haven't learned anything. We are only finding affirmation to our biases. So another cool thing, it's somehow ChatGPT can also write code, so that's wonderful. Let's ask it the question, okay, use the same terms, but please create a mind map for me. And it came back with a little bit of script that if I visualized that it became this UML class diagram instead of a mind map. And again, if you do this, I mean, this is a relatively small example, but if you do this with 300 tables, are you going to find the errors? If you're going to integrate 20 systems with 300 tables each, are you going to find the inconsistency? So even though it might be helpful in the generative parts of your project, you still have to make sure that you're making it very accurate. Because what I would really had in mind for the mind map was, of course, this little diagram. And it comes with a structure that is developed from my insights in the domain. It has had a long, of course, this is a very simple, it has gone through all the stages of, are we sure that we talk about this in this way? And similarly, if we wanted to have some sort of class diagram, I would have certainly expected something like this instead. Not just 3 classes, but I would have needed at least 4, because the apprenticeship preference is not an attribute of the apprenticeship. It should have been one of the preferences for the student. And the difference is, on the right, I lack any communication. On the left, I can see I have all my verbalizations, I have all my facts, I have all my examples in there. So let's look at another perspective on how AI might help you. I have a very small model here that says person, employee, supervisor, and the supervisor has supervision for an employee. And again, I asked Chat GPT, can you please give me a comment? Can you attempt to give me a definition? Can you give me some example data so that I can start discussing if that is actually correct? And also, very funny, can you ask me some questions? So here you can see an application where AI making failures, and as some people write, it's hallucinating, use that hallucination to actually come up with text that is readable to test our assumptions. There's a lot of discussion on LinkedIn. It's like, okay, this diagram is ridiculous. I said, yeah, that was beside the point. The next commented, okay, but who's John? How did it get to John? So these are wonderful remarks, because it really means that everybody's getting engaged by finding errors in this. So using AI to incorporate the errors, but use it in a sensible way, is really a way to harness that. So how do you teach the AI? Especially Chat GPT, and it's getting smarter every couple of weeks. So it's very, very impressive how much they can do. Is that you have to tell the AI what is the data, what is the structure, what is the grammar. So actually, funnily enough, we use it in a very loose way, but it has been trained with tremendous amounts of data in a way that is fed into the system in a relatively accurate way. So, but how would it be trained on our own jargon of the company? If that would be something that is protected, proprietary and all of that, then they might not have access to that. So how do you train it? Well, of course, we can start again with the fact-oriented model. We have stated our facts. So in the little example that I had, that says, well, Mary Blight lives in Amsterdam, we have all the grammar in there. We can say, okay, wait a minute, this part that specifies the 4 characters of Mary, that is our first name. The Blight is the last name. The whole of it, Mary Blight, is our student. And then again, there's an overlap between cities and city names. So we can actually generate training data for AIs from an information model to get it as accurate as we can. So the gist of the whole talk is I went from fact-oriented modeling to artifacts, to go from top down to DataVault. And in all of those aspects, you've continuously heard me say facts and information model. And it's, from my perspective, that's really where everything ties back together, is that if we can generate any kind of artifact, we still need to verify if it was correct. If we start using AI to propel our business even faster and cheaper, we still need to verify the end product. And once we do that, and once we really understand the business in a way that they communicate and they can verify, we can start driving all of those different technologies at the same time. So I'm going to reveal this one little picture that I promised. I said I gave DALL-E in as prompt, and I asked, can you give me a dark scene with a spotlight showing 27 dice forming a perfect cube? Now, I don't know what your definition of a perfect cube is, but this is definitely not mine. And I have to hallucinate a little to understand that this is really a stack of dice in the first place. My point in these again is, if you can pull all your data into one warehouse, but you still need to figure out what it means exactly. You can use AIs, you can use algorithms and all of that, but you always have to come back to, if I want to have this data work for the organization that I'm working for, it has to be very precise. Some of these dashboards that you will even can be completely off by presenting data very accurately from 3 different timelines. You can still make all kinds of failures. So you need to figure out from start to finish, what is the data and does it really work for me? And of course, giving it 5 minutes on Google and pulling down some clip art and all of that, I have a very accurate representation of what I wanted to do, visualize. And to tie it all off with a sort of Q&A at the end of this session, I started with this little drawing here, and probably a lot of people will recognize that from the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. The answer is 42, and then everybody realized, but we don't know what it means. And to me, that is a metaphor of so many IT products, is that we finally reached the deliverable, and then we still not quite sure what it actually does for the business, or we don't quite understand how we got there. So even though we may sometimes get an answer, find an answer, we always go back to, did we ask the right questions? So in the final few minutes of this meetup, I would suggest to flip it around. You give me answers and I'll ask questions.
I think we should start with Remco.
Remco, do you have answers?
Of course I have answers. But the interesting stuff enough that you have to wait for a couple of weeks and then I give you all the answers you want.
All right.
No, I think, Marco, interestingly enough, I think you're referring to it as well, right? Say, hey, a tool like Chat GPT. Well, I always use stupid drawings. You have beautiful drawings. But everything you can do to help business to get into the discussion and define what is really going on, right? Just saying, well, a student lives in a city of population, everybody can laugh about it and say, yeah, this is not what's going on. Let me as business person explain what's going on. So I think that is really what you want to do. You want to go in discussion, right? You want to go in communication.
Definitely. Definitely. If you overwhelm people in any talk, they will start thinking first. So you won't be able to get instant feedback. And if you're unfortunate, they will go quiet, assuming that you're the expert.
Yeah.
And again, you will have no confirmation if you're aligning. And even in some of the trainings that I did, I use this little game to just show how our psyche works in that respect. Is that, you know, you can show a sequence of numbers, for instance, the 1, 2, 3, 5, and then I asked the question, do you think you understand the rule of this number sequence? And some people will think, yeah, it's probably adding the previous number. And said, okay, yeah, how test me. And so they will give a valid number according to their rule. And I will say, yeah, that fits the rule. But until they start proposing the wrong numbers, only then will they really test their own assumptions.
Yeah.
So this is the talks with business in that respect is sometimes tricky, because we seem to be looking for confirmation of our own thought process.
Yeah, I think that that's absolutely right. Sorry, Howard. And I got two things to think about. I think I love your answering question, because it would be fun if you're going to ask a business person, give me an answer, and I'll try to figure out as an expert what the question should be on that answer. Because then they're probably going to realize, wait a minute, but if I'm telling you this and you are giving me the question, which should be the answer, it's completely wrong. So that would be fun. So yeah.
Yeah.
I'll try it one day.
I'm sure you will, Remco. Thanks, Marco. There's a few questions I have, but I'd like to just open it up to the community. Anybody there got some questions in terms of what Marco was talking about? I think there's quite a few questions there that should be there. Anyone want to ask?
I won't bite. Any question is a good question.
Howard, thanks for this, and Marco, thank you very much. I don't have a question, but I do have a comment. I think the emphasis on asking, are we asking the right question, is just something that I think we come back to again and again and again. And I think it really is a maxim, I think, to live by. Are we asking the right question? Yeah.
It's very hard. It's very hard to ask the right questions, because we're all experts in our own field. And to communicate with someone who's outside of our field of expertise and is an expert in their own right, it's very hard to assess from the information shared if that is all the information that is shared and is relevant. In Dutch, you have de or het, and I'm sure you have it in Afrikaans too. But as soon as my American girlfriend came to the Netherlands and had to start learning Dutch, she asked, when is it de and when is it het? And I consider myself an expert, and I couldn't explain it. So I had to look up what is the actual grammar rule. But the Dutch is full of rules apparently, and it has just as much exceptions. So you can imagine that if I would have to build a system for the intensive care of a medical facility, and I'm no brain surgeon, I have no idea what kind of questions I have to ask. It's extremely hard. So what I can do to facilitate that is to blatantly ask stupid questions, come up with wrong examples, so that they keep explaining what they don't initially explain. And they will have a hard time explaining their own knowledge, just as it's extremely hard for me to explain, okay, what is the grammar behind de or het? As soon as you've you've reached the level of expertise, and you will get there very quickly. Either that's in IT or in business. You probably will be able to explain maybe 20% of what you know in an interview. So 80% of the expertise that you're not even aware of, that you're applying it in your work, is just not being transferred. So in this case, if you would assume in such an interview that you heard 80% of the information, there's still a huge gap between what you have been told and what you actually think that you heard. And in that thinking of understanding what you heard is an assumption. And in the assumption is communication and all of that. But until you provide the wrong examples and propose the wrong structures and all of that, only then will you have learned how that expertise is actually operating. So to me, and again, this ties in with almost everything. I can empty all the source systems that I want. I can pull it all into one big data warehouse or data mesh or data lake or whatsoever. But somebody built it with an assumption. And now I have to reverse engineer not just the structure, but also the assumption to make sure that everything is correct. And people having faith that AI is going to help us in making an accurate assumption might be making a wrong assumption in the first place. Because that's just reaffirming our beliefs. We need to find the contrary, because only then will we learn. So to me, a failed AI is of more value than an AI that seems to act perfectly. Having an automated process to empty source system into a BI system is assuming that it's okay. And I've come across so many implementations where the source system contains data of domain experts where they say, okay, this is the structure, this is correct. But do mind, now that we're talking about it, the data that's in there from 2017 is off by 1 month because we had an error at the time. So you will never find this out if you just do data to data movement. You have to engage with the business. You have to engage with the people that actually use the data on a daily basis and might not be aware of all the things that they already know. So data works, kinda, because that's only part of the story. We really need to figure out how to engage with the people that actually produce the data and work with the data. And for that, sorry to say, we need to figure out how to communicate in their language, not the other way around. Similar to the AI, I need to figure out how to talk to AI for it to come back with meaningful information, not the other way around.
Correct. Thanks, Marco. Are there any other questions? Goshe, you got a question there, prompt engineering for Chat GPT. Is there a little bit more detail on that question?
So dis die ingenieurswese van Chat GPT. Dis hoe om die interface te vra wat vir jou die regte antwoorde gee. So basically what that is, I'm speaking better English than Afrikaans, my own mother tongue.
Yeah.
So basically it's the question is about, so Chat GPT is an excellent tool like Google or like any other. I think the thing is that you have to ask it the right questions, and it's called, there's some nice documentation out there about prompt engineering.
Yeah.
Which can help,
Yeah.
which can certainly help. But yeah, I think the thing that I see my signal is very, very bad, so I'm not sure if you can hear me.
No, we
Yes,
can hear
net
you.
jou Engels, Goshe. Jou Engels is 'n bietjie. Dis Afrikaans is reg.
Howard. Behave. Yeah, that's right. You know, there are articles out there that say, you know, wages are going down and new careers are being created at an extremely high rate, and it's all about AI prompting. And you know, I ask the similar question in different with different audiences. If you choose this tool, for what purpose are you actually using it? And I illustrate that with a very simple, it came out of a marketing book. It's like, you know, this company wants to sell drill bits because everybody needs to make a hole. But it's ludicrous because, you know, I don't buy a drill bit to make a hole. I get a drill bit as a tool because I want to hang a frame on the wall.
Yeah.
And it's similar with the AI. If you don't really get to the core of what you're trying to solve or facilitate, you will have asked the wrong questions and support AI for the wrong reasons.
That's precisely what I. So my first point on the question is basically so shouldn't one start off by asking Chat GPT or whatever, maybe some industry related questions about your client before you address the client specifically. So
Yeah.
depending on, so you can maybe, if it's about selling cold drinks, or maybe it's about creating a school, not creating a school, but running a school. So there's a lot of industry standards. So, I mean, if you take the 4 key concepts, because I was learned and when doing presentations, you don't put more than 4 bullets in a presentation. So I think the same would probably count for everybody, is that, I mean, get the 4 core concepts and start with that on Chat GPT and or something like that. You start with something which you already know about the company. I don't think one goes into the company just asking questions without having some bit of research done on that. That's my story, Donkey.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot to think about and talk about in these matters, but it's why would we ask ChatGPT and not our colleagues? You know, it almost ties in with the.
You get 3 sides of the story: the truth, your side, and your colleague's side.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, it's kind of funny because the users of the product of Kstock, they're really excited about this, and I was a little puzzled by it. And what it does for them, it actually helps them in the interview. Yeah. Because they don't have to personally ask any dumb questions. Because as soon as you do that, the expert will think, you know, why am I talking to you? You're dumb.
Sure.
So they kind of smartly offload the dumb questions to Chat GPT. So it actually facilitates in almost like a good cop, bad cop situation. The information analyst and the information modeler, they're the good cop, and they'll have Chat GPT play the bad cop. He's just coming up with the greatest nonsense, but it helps facilitate, and it offloads into a third virtual person to say, okay, this is wrong. Let's figure this one out. And that, to me, is the great benefit of deploying an AI in that respect, because it helps you think, it helps you read and engage with it. But of course, besides from that, it's an amazing piece of tech. It's as simple as that as well.
And it requires less coffee.
Any other questions? Anyone else like to ask some questions? Yes.
I see a hand somewhere.
Yes.
Maybe if I can add something to sort of the mix with my years at the university and seeing students a lot, I think the risk with ChatGPT at least comes in with people sort of portraying that they're experts in certain fields where they are not, which means that then they sort of use ChatGPT to fool the other person into thinking that they really know what they're talking about. And then instead of actually just making sure that you hold their hand and you just make sure that they don't build their arguments or their models on flawed assumptions, because that's a lot of the time what happens. So when I did my master's in industrial engineering, my I dedicated an entire year to try and just ask myself questions because I didn't trust sort of myself from how I was analyzing a problem. And I've been working with financial advisors for more or less my entire life, but I was still trying to sort of understand maybe there's things that I'm building my argument on that are flawed. And luckily I've got exposure to engineers and things like that sort of helped me to understand that it is okay to do that. But sort of the new way of using ChatGPT is not necessarily for prep for a meeting or trying to let's play with the model and see what it actually can help me with or what it can't help me with. People are just using it to say, oh, I've got a job to do. Let me just ask ChatGPT, because Chat is the proverbial sort of professor that will never make a mistake in their minds, because they assume that the AI just knows everything and the AI will not make a mistake. And then you sort of get things that are built onto sort of mistakes on mistakes, sort of. I mean, I'm in Norway at the moment, and one problem with ChatGPT and sort of data modeling would be that everybody in the different regions sort of writes Norwegian in a different way. They don't. There's not a standard version of Norwegian. So even looking at that as a problem is when you build a model, you need to understand sort of from which region this person comes to understand that, okay, they're writing this sentence, but what is this sentence actually referring to? Is it shorthand for something that they've been using a long time, or and that is it took me a long time, and I'm still sort of figuring that out. But I need to understand the person to understand what they meant when they wrote something. Where with AI, there's no sort of understanding the person behind it. The person is irrelevant. It's looking at the text, and then you have to actually put in really good data. And unfortunately, people generally do not put in really good data.
I agree. It can be very alarming, definitely. But the same, even taking AI out of the equation, we have people in our organizations that come off as an expert where they might not necessarily be. We have data issues that are already existing. So, but there's certainly a risk if you would apply AI as if it's going to solve something. And it's going to solve our data quality issues. It's going to solve our engineering issues. It's going to solve our communication issues. Then you're probably applying it for all the wrong reasons, because many of these things are not intentionally, but probably human error or misorganization in the first place. Then any AI applying to that is not going to take away the human error. It's just probably going to propel it. Yeah.
Thanks, Marco. There's one more question from Ross.
Yep.
Hi. Thanks, Marco. Fantastic session. So what I'm gathering here from the closure, I was kind of postulating, because of the types of questions and the way that you need to try and confirm, the results you're getting from these AI type systems, whether, something like the legal mind, if one actually starts to think about how the legal mind gets trained, is that not somewhere to start looking at? Because these guys are pretty good trying to establish the facts and verify, arguments, plaintiff defender arguments, and I was just wondering whether that training of the legal mind is not something that one would try and also start to try and incorporate in an AI tool, even, to test its own conclusions.
Test its own conclusions. That's interesting. Well, there are two things that I would like to address here. Is that if you look at the legal and political articles that we call law, they're very nebulous and very ambiguous and full of holes, because they are being written down by politicians that make deals on how to write it in such a way that everybody's okay with it. And even in the Netherlands, we're in the process of a huge, and it will take many years, to realignment, if you will, is that there is a new movement going on that takes the articles of the law and wants to be able to create lineage from that to every piece of data that is being stored by government bodies. And this starts with the tax department. They have hundreds of systems, copies of data, and they have no idea if they're still allowed to actually have that data according to the law. So when the law changes, they have to adjust hundreds of systems. So again, they have no idea where to start. So there's a lineage going on from law to system design, system implementation, and the other way around. The end goal is to be able to pinpoint any piece of data and have it all linked up to which law specifies that this department needs to store this data. And what it shows is that the legal articles are not clear at all. When it comes to income tax, you have a formula that is very precise. When it comes down to permits or everything becomes nebulous. And at some point, not even clear how to identify a citizen. So that's to allow Chat GPT to come up with an improvement is interesting, because what is it reading? And that's the other part. It really doesn't actually understand what it's doing. You and I can have a thought, create a second thought, and analyze the first thought with our second. Are we thinking it correctly? Are we thinking it through correctly? Are we sure? Or do we need to amend our own thought process? Or do we need to check it and talk with someone else? AIs don't do that. They're really a statistical machine on probability of the next word. And there are some processes going to combine logical reasoning AIs with textual processing AIs. So things are slowly being put together. But when it just comes off as text and testing the text that comes out of an AI, it's rather fruitful because it doesn't know how to analyze at all.
Right. I take it you meant fruitless, not fruitful.
Oh, sorry, fruitful.
Yes.
Yeah, thinking and talking at the same time in a foreign language is, yeah. My AI creates mistakes too. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Any other questions? So
yeah, did anybody want to hear more about DataVault?
Hey, 2 weeks from now, a little bit more, right?
Oh, good. You're going to pick up that one.
So,
Yeah.
Marco, won't you just share with us? I was interested in. I see that you are supporting the templates that Remco is providing. Or can you give us just a little bit more background in terms of how you've supported what sort of support is sitting in case talk for DataVault?
Okay, yeah, good question. So it's
Your
twofold.
amazing job, Marco.
Yeah, thank you. You know, I do enjoy what I do, so that helps in producing more new features. And I like your work, Remco. So that's that was an easy let's get together, because Remco does things, but he has issues with coming down to the nitty-gritty details to start automating this stuff. With the case doc, it's very much you can capture the language and you can generate all those artifacts, but you want to start top down somewhere. And that's where it came together. So Remco created these forms and templates that he can work off top down. So what CaseDoc really does, it has a very simple menu item called File Import CBC form. And it opens up the spreadsheets that are created off of with the templates that Remco provided. And it actually analyzes all the verbiage in that template and starts building the whole model of concepts. And you may remember that there was some color coding there. So
Yeah.
things that come from one sheet in your Excel are all color coded similarly. So, but then the detailed work starts, because then you have to actually get a very precise model of a conceptual model of those concepts. And once that is done, again, there's a simple menu item that says generate DataVault builder scripts. And what it does, it creates an archive that you can move over to DataVault Builder, and it will then start loading up all your source systems and all of that. So it's a very simple input-output in that respect. If you don't have something called DataVault Builder, CaseDoc itself comes with a ton of transformation and generators. So even if you don't have DataVault Builder, you can at least create your first version of a database that would resemble a DataVault model. So you can start loading it up into that. Yeah, that's about it. How it all connects to all these different approaches and tools.
Thanks, Marco. And maybe just to ask you there, so
Yeah.
we get from Remco's template, we get all of the core business concepts. And as you now talk about, is one of the things that you're probably missing are those fact statements. That's a correct scenario. And one of the things I was thinking about, and I'm not sure if you're aware that, for example, Azure is now allowing you to apply the natural language models to your own data sets within an Azure area. So, and it can be structured and unstructured data. So would it be able, to an extent, to be able to say, okay, I've now got these core business concepts. Could I find statements within the documents that represent the facts that we're looking for? And then to be able to go through the documents of the organization and present a series of facts, and in a way that will help you. It helps the business analyst not to be blamed for stupid questions. Now it's Chat GPT generating a set of facts, and the business would say yes, no. And I think what you're looking for is almost that no answer, so that you can implement a constraint to ensure that the model is tight enough to handle those different conditions, and maybe to detect where some of the documents are speaking untruths or whatever that may be.
Yeah, it's I'm a little hesitant to say that might work, because it almost sounds more like the data science part of things, where there's a bunch of, of course everybody's trying to hop onto this train, that's for sure. There's even some articles out there that say, okay, well, we don't need to do data modeling at all because we basically provide the data catalogs from our source systems to an AI system, and it'll do its work.
Yeah.
From a technical perspective, I can see how one could assume that that's going to work because it's all technical data, right?
Right.
As soon as I know that this is currency and this is a date and it comes with a column name that kind of resembles the other column name, it should be fine. And I can actually statistically analyze the data to see, yeah, they kind of line up. So that's cool. Let's do this. But I found too many examples where, you know, as an engineer, you know, the most simple example that I come up with every now and then is that in 2016, I was talking to medical specialists in a hospital, and they said, okay, and I had a very simple example about blood pressure. You know, blood pressure is blood pressure.
Yeah.
It's like, you know, there are two kinds, and that's it, up and down. And then the medical expert says, but no, it comes with a context. It's
No.
you know, it's if your blood pressure is entirely different if you're just coming out of the operation room.
Yeah.
Versus your blood pressure is coming out of a trauma helicopter.
Mm.
So just doing the technical part without, again, consulting what is the actual context of the business,
Yeah.
you will miss it. So and on the non-structured parts, it's not much different, unfortunately. I've went through 9 months of getting approval to get my American girlfriend in the Netherlands with a permit. They made failure after failure after failure. And I don't want to go through all the whole list, but they made assumptions on the finances. They made assumptions on, so it just never ended. And what it all boiled down to is an error in the mailroom on the initial application. They overlooked one little check mark.
Right.
So after 6 months of going back and forth, they concluded the file became so big they couldn't change the data anymore. They either had to push through no matter what, or restart the whole application from scratch. There were so many memos attached that explained how the data was wrong.
Yeah.
So without that context, which is really down to the expert working with the data, you know, like the other example from 2016, 2017 is like, okay, if you process this data, you have to know that you have to offset all the data by 1 month.
Yeah. Yeah.
AIs are not going to address that.
Sure.
So uploading, great, data science, wonderful, doing explorative, all amazing stuff. But in the end, that will lead to a report or a dashboard, and it needs to go into production. And then things come into play like, okay, it needs to be consistent, needs to be of high quality, it needs to be correct every time. And then doing the fuzzy is not going to cut it.
Yeah.
And I seriously think that a lot of professions in IT and the way that business views it overestimates the promise and underestimates the amount of work that needs to be done. Because over the past 20 years, almost everybody developed a tremendous amount of data debt. We have data, we don't know where it came from, we don't know what it means. And AI is not simply, it appears to be an accelerator, but it's not going to resolve any data debt. It's just going to multiply.
I think it's an accelerator in creating more data depth even.
Right, yeah. And this is
And having tools solving data modeling themselves. When I was starting out in BI data warehousing back in 1998, 1999, I know that people from Cognos and Business Objects by the time were very happy because you don't need to create a model because we have a wizard and it can do it all for you.
Yeah.
Based on technical naming and stuff, we can do everything.
But it is a very it's a repetition of moves in a way. For the past 20 years, we've seen software engineers taking over data modeling, data warehousing taking over standard applications. Now we've got data mesh. Now we've got AI, and it's continuously moving us forward without addressing what we haven't done during all of those increments. And so this forward motion is, it's unstoppable. We all have a smartphone. It's not like you can turn away from it. So the question is really not how to figure out how to resist or how to justify, but it's like how to embrace it and while doing the right thing. That's a very big question to answer because we all have to figure that out for ourselves in a way.
Sure. We got one more question from the man from Norway.
So maybe because I just enjoy the finance industry and all the nonsense that they let happen in 2008. The question when you throw in AI, who's going to take responsibility when things go wrong? Because I mean, if I contracted Howard to build something, if something goes wrong, I'm gonna call him up and say, Howard, something's not right. But when I use AI, who am I going to call and who am I technically then going to go to actually find out what the problem is or the answer is, or who's going to be the fall guy? Because the people who created the AI, of course, they're not going to take responsibility because they're just going to say, oh, sorry, guys, like this is not great, but things happen. Things are built on assumptions, and unfortunately, this assumption was wrong. And I think that's sort of, for me, the risk when it comes to using AI is you need to understand that it's in a lot of cases it's very important to have a person attached to certain decisions, because that person would then take more care of what is the risk of this possibly going wrong.
That is a very reasonable sounding approach. And it would be great to have that level of governance. One of the approaches that we have in the Netherlands, and I think it's by a chief data officer currently for the Ministry of Safety and Justice. He developed the 4 quadrants. His name is Ronald Damhoff. You might want to look up some articles. One of the things that he did is there is a need for data science that might not be accurate all the time. And it might include data that is not very rigid and high quality. But still, you can test your assumption to see if there is something going on. Especially when it comes to fraud detection. You sometimes don't know, and there is an Excel spreadsheet that was uploaded, which was taken out of a phone by somebody who was arrested. It's all a mixture of, we have accurate data from the bank, we have fuzzy data coming from other places. It doesn't mean that the data product itself is unusable. It just means that it comes with a
responsibility.
It comes with a grade that says, okay, this is, for instance, this is level F.
Yeah.
Because we're not fully sure. But if we want to report to the European Union, we better make sure that every number is accurate. And that is what we call the grade A reporting. So when it comes down to grade A reporting, every nut and bolt has to be signed off. Yes. When it comes to data science, sure, you can talk to some whiz kid that knows all about statistics and all of that, but he's not going to be held accountable. But as soon as you make that system go into production, then it needs to meet at least a level C, for instance, to make sure that certain things are in place. So even throwing AI in the mix, it's okay, but be aware what you're producing and why you're producing it and what you're handing over. So all of that comes into play. And I would argue that if you want quality products, yes, people have signed off, all rock solid, and then people will sign off because they know it is accurate. When it comes down to level E and F, sure, don't call me in the weekend.
Yeah.
So
Marco,
it's a gray area there too. Yeah.
Well, it reminds me of that one of the quality dimensions called reasonableness. And we used it to assess balance sheet statements because, when you get a value on a line item on a balance sheet, you can't determine the accuracy of it, but you can use a level of AI to understand whether it's reasonable or not. Now, the important thing about that dimension, and that's something I train the people, is to say, that's just a warning that there may be a problem. It may be right and may be wrong, but we need a person to analyze it and come back to us and say, is there something we don't understand about it? When we worked for the central bank, an analyst had to go and phone the reporting entity and say, what is this and why is it like this, and get some context back into the picture. But it was a very helpful technique to drive interaction when necessary, and have that situation. So it helped us a lot. It didn't give us the grade A, it just gave us a valuable interaction.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
What to do?
Yeah. Any more questions? Rob asked a question on business case. Rob, I'm not sure if that was meant for Marco. I'm just checking back. Rob, was that question on the business case for Marco?
Yes.
Won't you ask it again? I can't find it in the chat.
Oh, is there a business case? How do you get budget and sponsorship? And then I said, boring question, I know, because I always ask the same questions to try and get some knowledge of how you go about getting these wonderful initiatives or innovations going.
Rob, are you referring to Chat GPT or Case Talk, or your question? What is it in? Is it in connection with the work that Marco is doing?
It was, well, the discussion went from what I thought was from what is it, FCOIM?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then into Chat GP.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess the question applies to both. I mean,
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I have wondered about that for many years, and I'm actually sensing that we're on the brink of a change when it comes to awareness around data. For many years, we were, as modelers, we were outrun by software engineers. And then everything became data warehousing. So again, there's an entirely different attention span on what's important and what not. But I'm actually finding myself in a more comfortable position as an information modeling specialist, is that the threshold of AI and legal really push for something called responsible AI. More politicians are aware that data is not just data, but it needs to be accurate. and it needs to be dealt with in a responsible way. We've in the Netherlands had a couple of huge scandals about mishandling data, leaking data. And currently they try to help the population by lowering some of the sales tax, whereas the tax department says we cannot implement that. They were out of resources to be able to change all the systems that they needed to change to make that law work. So there's a increasing urgency to get rid of this data debt. So that's a comfortable place to be. The Dutch National Bank a while back had to report to the European Union. They had a similar issue. There was a number that was not aligning. They were fined multi-million euro. And they realized they had one data modeler on the payroll.
Sure.
Within 2 months, they had 25 to address this issue. So how do you find the budget? How do you find sponsorship? Unfortunately, and in a strange way, government bodies are currently leading the way because they need to abide by the law.
Yeah.
Their career is on the line here, and now that I've done chief data officer trainings, I'm a part of giving chief data officers training, exposing that there is a huge gap between the domain experts on the business side and IT on the other side. And no tool is going to solve that, except we need to learn how to communicate with each other. That makes it very aware. And I'm having a chat actually sometime this week with one of the municipalities in the Netherlands. They said, well, we delivered this product. But now that we realize that we didn't communicate, we want to do the project again to make sure that we're not missing anything. Because we're building systems that give advice to citizens, and we need to make sure that it's accurate. So those kind of things help. When it comes to more commercial organizations, the board of directors that have the biggest push, and I'm sorry to say, it's not IT pushing. It needs to come from the board of directors, where they start realizing that if they want to really proceed, they have to know their data. And I've seen a couple of commercial attempts where they demonstrate easy prototypes that come up with augmented reality things, dashboards that integrate all the data, and they say, yes, we love that. This is what we want. And then they're presented with the bill. Do you want to have it A grade or do you want it F grade? There is a price tag that comes with every grade. We can do F grade data products in 2 months. But if you want to have it A grade, then everybody needs to fall in line. Everything needs to be done. And then you can come back to the people that make these kind of decisions with a substantial argument. And funny thing is, if you talk to that level of decision makers, and you hypothesize, here's a bag of money. What would you invest in first? They first want to get the facts. They first want to invest in A quality data products. The reality is they don't. They put money in quick wins, hardly documentation, fast produced, and all of that, which is F grade data products. And it helps to make people aware, to have the discussion, not on a technical level, but having it on the level of, okay, what kind of quality are we having here? What kind of quality do you need? And what kind of quality are you okay with? And that comes with a consequence. It comes with a price. It comes with debt. And that is really the talk that seems to pay off in raising awareness of what we're not doing and what we should be doing.
Yeah.
I guess it's also got to do with, let's call it corporate or government credibility,
Yeah.
Yeah.
image, that kind of stuff. But I'm always down to grass tacks, rands and cents or dollars and cents, and said, oh, well, this is what it's going to save you. Is this what it's going to make you? That kind of thing. I know it's not easy. So,
Rob, I think just to share with you, I know data governance battles with this all the time in terms of justifying why, because lots of people don't want to be governed. And it is about finding that perfect storm that makes the executives realize that they've got to take part in it and they have to be part of it. And it's about listening to the business for those examples of where things have gone badly wrong and the risk has escalated and the outcomes haven't been very pleasant. And so, that's the first thing. And then it's really a lot of times of as you notice this, then it's about using the data models to get the right definitions of concepts that are that can cause these problems, or difference of interpretations that cause the problems. And I think we live with that all the time, looking for those examples, and we have to be listening for those perfect storms to be able to explain to the executives why they need and why we should all be doing a better job. Not just the execs, but also the IT people and the modelers and the.
So
And I increasingly use the examples of finance.
Yeah.
And I whether it's that if I'm lecturing for a class full of students at the university, it's like when you're in the position of buying your house and you want to have an engineer remodel your house, you're not going to say, okay, let's come in and we'll see how things will go. It's like you want a clear picture up front.
Yeah.
So what's it going to cost? What is the impact? All of that. What's the risk? Finance, same story. It's like, okay, if you have an accountant, which is, you can't do without, he checks all the books all the time. And HR is a constant stream of effort. You don't do business without HR because then all your employees will be gone. Now, looking at data, in most cases, there's hardly anything structurally aware. It's just, let's do another project. There is not a solid program through the organization to properly deal with that. And this is the weird part where data is so omnipresent. It's almost like business has become IT.
Yeah.
But we're still not properly communicating with each other in the way that we should, like we do in finance, like the way we do in HR, in the way that we, and I find it puzzling. Very intriguing, but very puzzling. So,
we have a question from Bilash Dash, and he's asked, can large language models generate data models when it can code? So do you believe it's possible for the model to generate a data model?
I do.
But it's I suppose it still doesn't clarify the misunderstandings.
No, correct. And I've demonstrated the slides that it can.
Yeah.
But who's going to verify it?
Yeah.
And it brings it back to the same questions. Who made sure that it's correct? And I've been at data modeling conferences and I've shown very accurate data models. They've proven themselves in real life production systems and they're accurate. And I present them with a data model. And then I ask one question: who can verify that this is correct?
Sure.
Nobody will lift a finger.
Yeah.
And this is the same with Chat GPT. Yes, it can generate a script yes, it can generate a script for diagrams, but who's going to verify it?
Belash, is that an Belash? Any comments from your side, sir?
Yeah, I mean, verification is required at this moment, regardless any model. Any algorithm model needs verifications from user at this moment, and that's what we call that man-machine interaction is pretty critical for the success of AI. We can't just say that algorithm, you give me something and I will replace a person. That is not going to work. Maybe for another decades, because nobody is sure. So that man-machine interaction is pretty much critical, at this moment. Even if it produces code, we cannot say take that code and deploy in production and it would work. What we are saying that, would there be a bit of productivity, gain sort of thing if we can define certain standards, for example, whenever you work in a mass, enforcing certain standards or data governance could be critical, because end of the day, you are managing, a bunch of human beings or developers or whatever. So regardless, whatever control you have, but it requires, some sort of, verification, validation. Even if people do their code, still then we do peer review, number of review, even if, let alone, large LLM does that or not. Even if, people do, we still have a multiple review cycles, just to ensure that it is fit for purpose. Where I was coming from, whenever it comes to different enforcing certain standards, etc., if you can automate, then life becomes a bit easier. I'm not saying it will be 100, you will be 100% free, that you would say that, no, I'm not going to do anything, machine will do. That is not possible in a near future, maybe, but, we can achieve certain degree of automation. Number two, we may achieve in enforcing certain standards and controls.
Yeah, I think when it comes down to that, I've tried to in elaborate discussions with Chat GPT to explain it what factor-oriented modeling is, and at some points it seemed to be understanding it, and then at other points it is completely missing the point. So having those kind of systems verify, you can even see it in the other AIs that defeated the Go players. Is that now they found ways to even very simple rules, and the AI completely falls flat on his face. So you to automate it, simply put, if you really want to automate it, there needs to be a very rigid algorithm and not a statistical one. So you can, and like how it says, you can find a certain bandwidth, but what it's really going to say is that the values that it encounters are matching what it found before. And then the question comes, okay, what did it find before? And was that data correct? Is there a bias in there? Is there, how did we train this model in the first place? So on all the levels, it boils back down to, can we verify it? And there's a bunch of universities here taking an initiative for the next 5 to 10 years, I think, on developing standards on how to make AI responsible. How to make it ethically, so there's so many questions still, but even if I've been in these work groups for 8-9 months, nobody talks about the data yet. And this is intriguing to me. It's like, okay, but what do you feed this machine? Do we know? So yeah, verification is a very big part. And verifying the AI itself, yes. Can you have AI help you? I definitely say yes. Even very technical issues I managed to solve thanks to chatting to Chat GPT, but it did not provide me answers. It just made me think more.
Yeah. Which is good. I mean, that's
Yeah.
which is helpful, but we got to, our expectations have to be clear. Yeah. Guys, I'm sorry to cut this out. I really appreciate it, Marco. We close on 2 hours now. Thank you
we
very
did.
much.
I wasn't expecting that.
No, but thank you everybody. I have to close down now. My apologies. But Marco, thank you again for
All
a
good.
really nice talk. Thank you, everybody.
Good. I enjoyed it. Thanks.
Cheers.
Bye.
Cheers. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.